are somehow a notices away from pulverizing their so-called Russian enemy. At the same time, as we speak, 345 million people around the planet face hunger. This number increased from 222 million just since March. In this ghastly gamble of what Noam Chomsky speaks about, who is it that the US ruling class is willing to sacrifice? They constantly talk about sacrifice. Biden says the American people are willing to sacrifice in order to support this war in Ukraine. The problem is, are we actually going to let him sacrifice the planet? No. Are we going to allow them to sacrifice the Ukrainian people? No. Are we going to allow them to sacrifice the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America? No. We refuse in the name of peace. We refuse to accept their conditions and their terms. We are beyond honored. I am so excited to have Jill Stein in the house. Because Jill Stein is, I mean, I don't even know if I can call her a politician because I don't want to insult her name. But she has been someone who has, in multiple political spaces and debates in the political arena, has demonstrated a new type of politics, a different type of politics. In her time, she's been twice presidential candidate for the Green Party in the United States. And quite often, I would say she's used to it now. She is a lone voice for peace. She's often a lone voice for what is rational, for what is just. Jill Stein, we're honored to have you here. This is a pleasure.
I'm so honored to be here. I feel speechless from having heard my own thoughts. I don't know if you're all feeling this too, but it's like this is such a reality check here that's going on. It's really great to see that we are not crazy, you know. We really are telling the truth. We really are pointing the way forward. For those whose hair is my color, we've been through this many times. We've seen this certainly since Vietnam. We really cut our teeth on what it means to fight manufactured consent. It is not easy when you are facing wall-to-wall saturation propaganda 24/7. We know what that's about, but we also, and we went through this certainly in Iraq, big time, weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, Saddam Hussein's, horrific abuses, the yellow cake that also wasn't, all these myths, one after the other. So for those of us who've been through this many times, some of us at least have really learned to approach the prevailing propaganda with a lot of skepticism. You have to assume it's not true until proven otherwise, instead of just accepting being powerless, being hopeless, and entrusting our fearless political leaders and their security state to direct us forward. We've seen where that goes. And in many ways right now, we are sort of facing the logical conclusion of a political and economic system which is run whole hog for the benefit of the elites. It's no exaggeration to say that this is, whatever you want to call it, end stage capitalism, end stage empire, the colonialist, white supremacist, male supremacy project, whatever you want to call it, this is it. This is where it goes. This is unacceptable, unsustainable, unsurvivable. And the chickens have come home to roost here, back here in the seat of the empire. The chickens have really come home to roost in the struggles of the everyday American people, working people, and the poor, who are growing by the millions in the US and around the world. We see a few billionaires. We see the expansion of the billionaire class. They've added some, I don't know, hundreds to their ranks, while hundreds of millions have joined the ranks of poverty, severe and abysmal poverty. So, this system just doesn't last. And we are all in the crossfire. It's not just the people of Ukraine who are being set up to the last person, to the last man, woman, and child. Their lives are being expended. We are all a part of this vast exercise of unaccountable and abusive power on the part of economic and political elites. And we are saying no more. The buck stops. And it's just music to my ears to hear what everybody has been saying here. I want to, inject, what should I say, confidence and power into our position. As Alice Walker has said, excuse me, and others before her, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. It's really amazing how much power we have, even on this issue. Thank you. Gallup, the polling organization, has been doing monthly polls where they ask people, what is the most critical issue? What is the most important issue to you? If you look at Congress, you'd think, well, obviously the most important issue is Ukraine. It is weapons sales and production. It is the military-industrial complex. That's what Democrats and Republicans agree on. That is their funding priority, not funds to expand the child tax credit, not funds for health care as a human right when 70,000 people every year are dying from lack of health insurance. And that's on top of the COVID deaths, where 1 out of every 3 were linked to a lack of health insurance. It's not the housing emergency that is just exploding before our very eyes. There's something like 11 million people right now who are facing potential imminent eviction, and that is certainly growing. Those figures are old because what is being hit by inflation, it's not only energy costs and food costs, it's also housing, big time. So we're not funding that. No, to look at Congress, what we have to fund, and this is very clear and very explicit, what we have to fund are a new generation of nuclear weapons, are more tanks for Ukraine. It's more armaments. That's their number one priority. But to look at this Gallup poll, what you see actually, excuse me, is that the issues that people rate as number one are economic issues. It's economic security, it's inflation, it's the cost of living, it's 60-some% of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. It's the growing economic desperation, which is at the top. And next to that, it is what should we say? It's the betrayal of our governing officials. That's actually like the number 2 official. That's the number 2 rank, is how outrageous we are being governed and how abusively we are being governed. That's the number 2 issue. So you don't hear about this, on MSNBC. You're not hearing about what's important to people. You're just hearing kind of the Defense Department talking points. That's what's important to them. But where does Ukraine and Russia rank? Well, it's about 1% of people who say that this is the leading and key issue. So that should really tell us something. And those of us, who've been through this before, who watch how the military industrial media complex really comes on, with all guns blazing, and we're supposed to be accepting their version of reality, which is just totally turned on its head, that begins to crack, and that fades right away. We can smell a rat from the very beginning. This has been a rat from the beginning, and this one is falling apart, I must say, much faster than the other propaganda efforts have really fallen apart. And as Noam Chomsky was saying, to actually look at real deep polling across the world or even in the EU, there is not support for this war. There's much greater support for actually negotiations and a peaceful settlement ASAP. So we should have, all the confidence and faith in our heartfelt intuitions. As Claudio was saying, above all, we are human beings here, and we are listening to our hearts, and we are listening to the hearts of our fellow humans, regardless of what side of any border they happen to live on. We know really what the story is. And the story is that all of us are in the crosshairs right now. We're all in the crosshairs. I want to expand on that just a little bit, because no doubt we are going to be having this conversation at our Thanksgiving dinners, and we're all not going to be on the same side if your family is out like mine. And we have a job to do. No pressure, but like Claudia was saying, we have a collective responsibility to remember and to tell the truth and to share truth and justice with the people we are in community with and in family with. And that is going to that will be the leading edge of the change, just like being out in the street will be the leading edge of change. Really using all of the tools at our disposal to throw the bums out from elected office. That will be part of the change that also needs to happen. But I want to talk a little bit about how this is hurting us. We at the center of the empire, who are supposed to be like all for this. I want to just say a few things about the many ways that this is hurting. And let's see, maybe we will try to show a picture or two. Let's see. This does not seem to be advancing. Okay, great. All right, so this one, you may be familiar with this. This is just the diagram of our budget, the congressional budget. And just, in a glance, picture tells 1,000 words here. You see the military budget. This was, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, where it was a mere $752 billion. It's now actually quite a bit more. It's about $740 billion, which is proposed for the coming fiscal year. So it's growing, 840. Did I say 7? It's 840. So it's actually growing by leaps and bounds. And this doesn't even tell the whole story, because lots of pieces are kind of buried where you won't see them, like nuclear weapons development. Where is that? That is in energy and the environment. Why? Because it's destroying the environment. Maybe that's why they're putting it there. I don't know. But there are tens of billions of dollars that are buried there. There's Homeland Security. There's the VA. Why do we have all these health issues to deal with for our veterans who've been put on the front lines, having very little choice in the matter? That too is a sequela of these wars. So it's actually $1 trillion a year. It's already $1 trillion a year. It's getting bigger, and it's more like 2/3 of the budget now. It's not a mere 50%. It's way more than that. And you can see, what does that leave? It just leaves a pittance for everything else. And this is just, again, the money behind the madness. This goes a long way to say why it is that all these crazy things are happening. They are being funded. Next slide. So you'll see on the bottom left, endless war is getting about $1 trillion a year. Social programs, if you add them all up, they're getting about half that amount. And any one department is just getting a tiny, a pittance. That is not okay. It's not okay that it's half as much as military funding. And then the climate collapse that we hear so much lip service to from the Democratic Party in particular. what is it actually doing about that climate crisis? Well, now it has completely gone into reverse gear on the climate crisis because of the war. As previous speakers alluded to, that is one of the biggest victims of the war, is that it provides a perfect excuse not only for war profiteering, but also for fossil fuel profiteering. And it becomes an opportunity not only to use more fuel, because, right, we have to drop a lot of bombs and fly a lot of airplanes and do all that stuff, but also we have to build new fossil fuel depots, and we have the sanctions really to thank for this. Most of the disruption of energy supplies around the world is not due to the war, it's mostly due to US sanctions. So we don't even have to wait to stop the war. We could just end the sanctions right now, and then guess what? Most of the hunger crisis and most of the fuel crisis goes away like that. We have the power to do that. We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait. And the 350-some million people now who are facing food insecurity, 50 million of them who are facing acute starvation, that doesn't have to be the case. With the flick of a pen, the food and the fuel could begin to flow again, even before we've gone through the difficult process of negotiating a settlement. We could have a ceasefire also with the flick of a pen. So this is a war of choice. This is a catastrophe of choice. And it's not just Putin's invasion. Putin's invasion was the latest response to a buildup and an escalation of mutual attacks that have been going on at least since 2014, with the US support for the coup in the Maidan, where the right wing and Nazis had a very major role to play because they put their hands around the throat of everybody involved, and they don't take no for an answer. You may remember that Zelensky, who now seems really kind of over the edge, he was elected on a peace platform. He was elected to implement the peace accords, the Minsk peace accords. So that's where we should be. That is within our reach, and that is what we should be pushing for even right now. Let me just see if I can show another one here. The crisis of the war and the climate is not separate from the crisis of justice. And I just want to not leave that out here. And this chart, I want to just take a minute to explain it because it says so much about what's going on. And what you see here going from left to right is wealth, total wealth in the US. So it's going from 1989 up to almost 2020. You see wealth is growing. But where is it growing? It's growing in that blue section, which is the top 10%, and the piece above the little red line is the top 1%. So it's mainly the top 1% that is making out like bandits here. What's happening to the lower 50%? Well, the lower 50% is the brown line at the very bottom, if you can even see it. That is 2% of our wealth is distributed among the entire half of the population, which is making do with this. This, in my mind, goes a long way to explain why we are in the mess we are in. Not only because everyday people are really being starved to death, literally, but also because power is concentrated, increasingly concentrated into the hands of a very few who purchase their politicians as usual, and between the economic and political elites, they keep generating policy to just make this worse. So that's just to include in our discussion, that we have a crisis of war, we have a crisis of climate, and we have a crisis of justice. We don't solve any of them without solving all of them. And then I will try to wrap up because I could keep going all day here. It's really wonderful to have you all here doing what you're doing. I want all of us to help all of us lead the charge on this because, again, no pressure, but it really is up to us. We're here because we get it, and as has been said here several times today, the clock is ticking and we don't have much time. So we really need to use every means at our disposal. Part of that is being out in the street. Part of that is also just in our conversations, talking to our friends and neighbors in our communities. So what is the cost of militarism? It's not only those dollars that we've been talking about, it's also that when you superpower the military, it does really crazy things. Our military is completely off the charts. It's those 800 bases that we have around the world, when the rest of the world has 30 of those bases all put together. It's the cost of our budget. It is 68 coups and regime change operations that have been instigated by the U.S. Since the Second World War. According to the Congressional Research Service, we have intervened with our military 251 times in the past 20 years. 20 years, 30 years, in the past 30 years. So you get a military that's doing crazy things, and we have the commitment to nuclear weapons. And in this recent nuclear posture review, in spite of Joe Biden's promises during the campaign that he was going to adopt a policy of no first use, he basically adopted a policy as, well, yes, we can use nuclear weapons on a first basis when we decide. We're not going to take any of our tools off the table. And that policy is one of complete nuclear madness. I also want to mention full spectrum dominance. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Yeah, okay. So people in this room probably know what it is, but just very briefly, full spectrum dominance is the established official policy of the U.S. foreign policy and military establishment, which is, to put it very simply, it's that we will dominate all spaces and all other countries. And no, we will not allow competitors to emerge militarily or economically. So this goes a long way to explain why we've had this gearing up of hostilities towards both Russia and to China. They are not allowed. You are not allowed to become a full player on your own terms. That's basically what's going on there. And this policy, it turns out, was actually declared. How far back does it go? It actually goes back to the breakup of the Soviet Union, 1991. In 1992, the Pentagon issued its formal policy, basically that it will not tolerate the emergence of new competitors in the region of the former Soviet Union or anywhere else. It will not tolerate competitors that are hostile, and it also won't tolerate competitors among our allies. It actually said that. I mean, it's really incredible. If this was a person, you would be sending them to a social worker. I wish they had such a thing, The UN needs social workers. And as part of that exercise in full spectrum dominance, we have been basically undermining peace developments for a long, long time, for decades actually, but particularly in the conflict with Ukraine. And then the escalation towards the nuclear war. We have been the ones who have disrupted the treaties. The US of A is the one who essentially pulled out of and destroyed virtually every nuclear treaty. This is a big problem because when you have a lot of nuclear weapons and you don't have rules for how they're being used, it's very easy for people to panic when they think a nuclear weapon is approaching and to just, trigger the response when it's not even warranted. But in truth, the real solution here is just get rid of the nuclear weapons all of them. And that really goes hand in hand with getting rid of our empire and our incredibly hyper-aggressive military state. It's not just the war in Ukraine, it's the whole reliance on militarism as essentially the basis of our foreign policy. That has to end. And again, the bottom line is that this comes back to us to roost. The chickens come home here to roost. And what's happening in the climate is another case in point. That just shows you how the temperature's been going up from the year, whatever it is, around 2000 up to current. So I won't say a lot more about that except that the last 8 years on record have been the hottest years around. I'm only showing the Colorado River here because most of us are eating the food that is produced thanks to the Colorado River, which supplies half of the fruits and vegetables for the entire United States. It is 75% depleted. It is well on its way to a critical threshold where the water will not flow. So expect famine to be coming to a neighborhood near you pretty soon. This isn't something we can just sit back and allow it to go on. Same thing with the collapse of the ice sheets, which is well underway. This year, for the first time ever, rain was observed falling on Greenland and also on the South Pole, on Antarctica. And who knows what happens to ice when water falls on ice. It greatly accelerates the melting. So I wouldn't put great stock excuse me, in any assurance that, oh, don't worry, you know, massive sea level rise is a long way off. I mean, it's already well underway, and there are many countries who are paying the price in many forms. In Bangladesh, we've seen 33 million people have to get up and find a new place to live and a new source of food. 33 million, that's a third of the country. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. That's not from sea level rise, but that's just change in weather patterns and in rain. So the climate has come home to roost, and I will mention 60% of animals, including mammals and reptiles, fish, and birds, are gone. 60% just since 1970. So it's really hard, I find, to put your hands around both what's happening with the war machine and what's happening with the climate. It's like my blood pressure goes through the roof to think about any one of these, and then to think about both of them. It's just, you know, it's just untenable. And it's really important to take that outrage that you get when you think about what the elites are doing to Mother Earth and humanity. It's really important that we target that into fighting, because this is a fight we can win. And as Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it. In fact, we are not just like, you know, competitive. Peace is not just a good idea. It's actually the only way forward. So I'm gonna force myself to stop. One last thing, just I want to show this picture because this so demonstrates the connection between war and climate. Fossil fuels are the, they are the engine of war. So fossil fuel use goes way up. The military-industrial complex is equivalent to like the 47th nation in the rank of fossil fuel emissions. So it's substantial. It's not the whole 9 yards, but it is. Excuse me. Thank you. It is a very important part of the puzzle here. It's not only the fossil fuels, it's also the destruction of habitats, toxic pollution, the diversion of resources from other critical needs. There are just so many ways that these things interact. Here you just see the graphic from a project at Boston University on the interaction of climate and war, making the point that the military has been emitting basically 257 million cars worth of emissions. So that's a lot of stuff. It goes up, and here's one happening right now, or that just happened. This is the single biggest release of fossil fuels ever on record. That is the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, which bubbled up as methane. You may know that methane is 80 times more powerful than CO2 in terms of its climate warming impacts. So this is just routine. I mean, this is what happens in war, and who could have done this? I don't know. Who possibly could have benefited from this? Well, what's the outcome? They're building 10 new LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas terminals, in order to replace what just got blown up mysteriously by someone we can't figure out who. But we are now building the replacement. 10 of these very destructive, very environmentally destructive terminals in the US and 10 terminals in the EU. And what does that mean? It's not only that more fossil fuels are being used, but it also means that a whole lot of new infrastructure is being built. So war is an end run around the limits and the climate cautions and things like that for the fossil fuel industry. War is a profiteering opportunity for both the fossil fuel and the weapons industry, and we're going to stop it. So with that, I just want to thank you all so much for being here and for carrying this incredible, glorious fight forward. We are going to win, and it's wonderful to be on your team. Thank you.